the conventional wisdom is that novels are about plot and short stories are about inner experience or character. When we read novels, we are reading for the plot. We are interested in the way that a plot gets put together and how it is resolved. And we often judge whether or not we enjoyed a novel based on how well we think the author executed what the plot was and then gave us the outcome at the end of the book. In short stories, you're not really reading for the plot, and indeed plot is not part of what a short story is. Short stories try to give us windows into the experience of believable people. And it doesn't do that by having a very carefully ordered and executed story that moves from point A to point B to point Q. Rather, the short story just kind of follows the experiences of the main character, because there's usually a single focus or character focus in a short story. The short story follows a main character through a series of events that are interesting precisely because they're not plotted, and indeed they're kind of random. There's a certain happenstance to the short story that is not kind of logical. One of the reasons why I actually like the genre of the short story is precisely because it is not logical necessarily how it is that a character moves from one point to another. There's actually something very random and haphazard the way that things develop in short stories. And the reason I find that satisfying is because that seems closer to what life is like. Life is not an organized plot most of the time. We are often surprised in our lives when the kind of plot devices that we think should be in place turn out not to happen. And short stories seem to be very astute on exactly that issue. They are fully self-aware of the fact that lives are not plotted, that they are very disorganized, that they are random, that even just one day in the life of a person, even though we have our schedules and we have things that we need to do, there are always things that happen that are not part of the schedule, not part of the plot. And short stories, because they don't worry too much about where one is in a particular schedule, actually have a lot more freedom to indulge in those experiences of happenstance, of unpredictability, of randomness, of events that we can't control, dominating and actually becoming what our experience is. That's what short stories do, and that's what life is like. And that's why I take great pleasure in reading the genre myself. Short stories are reflexive and reflective texts. Because they're not trying to tell a long story, because they are trying to give us moments into consciousness, moments of experience, they're very much about reflection itself. And I think also, if we keep with the comparison between the novel and the short story, in a novel, you can skip sentences, paragraphs, even chapters, and you don't lose the plot, you don't lose the character. You're spending so much time in the pages of a novel with the character, with the story, that you can afford to skip certain parts of it. And I think oftentimes, when people are being honest about how they read novels, they'll tell you that they just skip whole pages because they want to stick with the plot. They want to get to the event. They want to get through the crisis. Or whatever the trouble is. And in a short story, you cannot afford to skip any words at all because you could really miss the whole point if you did that. So I was actually reading a short story by Lynn Cody the other day, and there's a moment in a story where the main character is having this kind of internal monologue in her head. And the other character in the scene, who is her lover, notices something about her that the protagonist herself does not see about herself. And the other character, the male character in this scene, reacts in this very powerful way. He has a moment in relation to the character that, again, the character has no idea that she's actually exhibiting what she's experiencing in the scene that Cody depicts. And that just seems to me to be a very, kind of persuasive moment. And it's persuasive because what it shows are that two characters in the same scene can have a very different experience of the same events. And that just speaks to me of that desire of their reflexive mind to be able to contemplate such things. And to really kind of dwell in the particulars of the moment as conveyed by words. That short stories really do demand of us. They don't let us skip those words. They don't let us be hurried by our own desire. They make us slow down. They make us take a moment and pause. And those moments of pause that the short story gives to us is, I think, something that the reflexive mind really craves. Have a little time out from the busyness of your life and read a short story. And that's a way for that mind that desires moments of peace, of stillness, of tranquility, to experience them through the pages of a short story in a way that I think is very satisfying. I've often wondered about how reading is gendered or how writing is gendered. Is there a particular way that women write that is different from the way that men write? And as a corollary question, is there a different way that men read than the way that women read? And I don't have a good answer to that question. I think one of the real attractions of reading is that experience of a world that is not yours. That experience of people and events and ways of expressing oneself that are not mine. So as a male reading anything, I'm interested in experiencing worlds with which I don't necessarily identify, that speaks a voice that is different from mine, that has desires and expectations and interests that are not the ones that I inhabit in a daily way. And so I'm actually very interested in reading fiction of all kinds, but particularly fiction, movies, music as well, written by women, written for women, because I view it as a way for me to understand worlds and experiences that aren't mine, and that's one of the great attractions of reading, in my view. And there's an educational part to it also. I think that experiencing short stories written by women, by Alice Munro, by Mavis Gallant, by Lynn Cody, are ways for me not only to experience these different kinds of worlds and these different ways of that men and women might express themselves, it's also a way for me to overcome my own kinds of, let's just call them prejudices or biases about how things should happen or how things should be said or how experiences should be understood. It's a way for me to understand, perhaps that there's a little bit more of a universality to experience, and that my own particular conceptions of how things are not the only way that the world needs to be. And I think good writing of all kinds, but particularly writing by people who are not like me, allows me to have a real integrity in relation to my own questioning about why things are the way that they are. So I really enjoy reading work written by women, work written by people from different racial or religious or ethnic backgrounds, because it, again, invites me into a world that is not mine and helps me better understand my own kind of conception and not think that my way of thinking is really the only one that matters.